Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Lady gets her iPad stolen and decides it should be everyone's problem. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. The iPad was stolen from her unlocked car off school property. We were still responsible, apparently. I work as an administrator at an elementary school, and last Monday morning started out like most others, busy, loud, and mildly chaotic in that very specific school drop-off way. Parents rushing, kids dragging backpacks bigger than their torsos, teachers trying to herd everyone inside before the bell. About 20 minutes into the morning, a coworker came into my office clearly rattled, like flushed face, talking too fast, that kind of agitated. She tells me a mother is absolutely losing it because someone broke into her car and stole her iPad while she was dropping her child off. Okay, that's genuinely awful. I don't care how careless someone might be. Having your stuff stolen feels violating. And since I'm one of the very few people with access to the school's surveillance system, of course I agree to help. I just need two things. Which car was it and where was it parked? We head outside together to find the mom. Instead of calmly waiting or asking for help, she's already in full meltdown mode. She's yelling at a small group of teachers near the entrance, demanding the footage right now, saying she knew this school was horrible, and loudly accusing the place of being full of thieves. The teachers look stunned and uncomfortable because none of them have any control over cameras or investigations. I try to introduce myself, explain who I am, and tell her I'm willing to help, but she's so angry she won't even engage. She snaps something about incompetence, storms off, and drives away. Honestly, I didn't blame her in that moment. If I thought someone stole my iPad while I was dropping my kid off, I'd be upset too. So instead, I went to her child's teacher to get a clearer picture of what actually happened. That's when things took a sharp turn from unfortunate situation to this explains everything. First, the car was not parked in the school parking lot. She had parked it on the public street instead because she wanted to save time. Second, the car was unlocked. Third, the iPad, bright pink case and all, was sitting on the passenger seat in full view. Fourth, she had never activated the Find My feature. At that point, my heart kind of sank because I already knew where this was going. This moment is the story's crucial pivot. The 4-point list acts like a closing argument, shifting the entire narrative from a crime to be solved to a lesson in personal responsibility. Each point systematically removes a layer of plausible sympathy. I pulled the camera footage anyway. The only camera that even vaguely captured the area showed her car in the distance, partially obscured by passing traffic. I watched the entire 10-minute window from when she and her child got out to when she came storming back, realizing the iPad was gone. Several people walked by. Most didn't even glance at the car. One blurry figure did slow down near it longer than the others, but there was no clear view of a face, no plate, no direction of travel, nothing usable, nothing actionable. We sent her the footage anyway and pointed out the one person who lingered. She was furious. She said the footage was useless. She demanded more angles. She asked why we didn't have cameras covering the public street. She implied we were deliberately hiding something. At one point, she even suggested the school should reimburse her for the stolen iPad. When we explained again that the incident didn't happen on school property and that the car had been left unlocked, she accused us of covering up for thieves. A few days later, she left a 1-star Google review claiming the school protected criminals and refused to help victims. It's been a week now and things have finally cooled off. No police follow-up, no reimbursement, just a lot of noise and indignation. Nothing dramatic in the ending, but I'm still baffled by the sheer entitlement of making a series of bad decisions and then expecting everyone else to pay for them. Peace. The lack of a dramatic ending is the point. The story brilliantly illustrates a modern phenomenon. The performance of outrage as a tool to deflect personal accountability. The Google review is the final, flailing attempt to assign blame anywhere but herself, making the quiet, unresolved cooling off feel like a well-deserved reality check. And our next story. The call that cost an ambulance company $250,000. This happened a long time ago, back when I was still in college, and to this day it's the most satisfying revenge I've ever gotten without lifting a finger or raising my voice. At the time, I didn't even realize it was revenge. I just knew something was wrong and that one phone call was about to blow up a lot more than my weekend. While I was in school, I had my EMT certification and was doing what a lot of people in healthcare do early on, scrambling. I'd just been laid off from another job and needed income immediately. EMT work wasn't glamorous and it definitely wasn't well paid, but I found a small ambulance company close to my house and figured it would at least keep me afloat until I finished my degree. From the very first week, it was obvious the company was barely holding itself together. They were a tiny operation, 3 ambulances total, and they were desperate for transports. Every call was treated like a lifeline, no matter how questionable it was. Long-distance transfers, borderline unsafe requests, weird hours. If someone was willing to pay, management wanted us rolling. Corners were being cut everywhere. Schedules were stretched thin. Staffing was just enough to avoid collapse, but not enough to avoid burnout. Everyone was tired all the time, and no one talked about it because no one wanted to lose hours. Still, I needed the job, so I kept my head down. The owner was mostly a ghost. I met him exactly once in person. He lived up in Seattle while the company operated out of the Bay Area, which already told me a lot about how involved he actually was. Day-to-day operations were handled by a skeleton crew of supervisors who were clearly under pressure to say yes to everything. When the owner did call, it was always the same tone, sharp, impatient, and completely detached from what actually happened on the ground. He talked about transports like chess pieces. Miles, hours, patient conditions, none of it seemed real to him. The setup masterfully establishes a culture of systemic neglect. The owner's physical and emotional distance, treating transports as abstract chess pieces, frames him not just as a bad boss, but as a negligent operator who's severed the link between profit and human safety. The incident that set everything off happened at the end of a 10-hour shift. It was one of those shifts where you're watching the clock more than the patient monitor. Everything had gone smoothly, and I was already mentally checked out, thinking about food, sleep, and being anywhere but the ambulance bay. My partner and I were cleaning up, getting ready to clock out when my phone rang. It was the owner. That alone made my stomach sink. Owners don't call line EMTs at the end of a shift unless something is about to go sideways. He didn't bother with small talk. He told me he needed me to take one last call before heading home. Then, like he was doing me a favor, he mentioned he'd throw in a $50 bonus if I agreed. That should have been the first warning sign. I asked for the details, and he texted them over. I remember staring at my phone, rereading the message, thinking I'd misunderstood something. I hadn't. He wanted us to transport a psychiatric patient in full restraints over 600 miles, one way, through Southern California traffic, and then, without stopping, turn around and drive straight back. I did the math in my head. Even without delays, it would have been close to 10 hours one way, with traffic easily more. By the time we got back, I would have been pushing 30 hours awake, most of that behind the wheel of an ambulance. I didn't hesitate. I told him no. I explained calmly that it wasn't safe, that I was already at the end of my scheduled shift, that driving that long without rest was dangerous, not just for me and my partner, but for the patient and every other person on the road. I told him honestly that I was afraid I'd fall asleep and kill someone. There was a pause on the line, then he exploded. He accused me of refusing to do my job. He said this was part of the work and that I was being lazy. He tried to pressure me into quitting instead of outright refusing, like that would somehow make it cleaner for him. When that didn't work, the tone shifted from angry to vicious. He fired me on the spot, over the phone. I stood there holding my phone after the call ended, more stunned than anything else. I wasn't just angry, I was disturbed. The recklessness of it all hit me at once. This wasn't about a missed shift or a bad attitude. He was genuinely willing to gamble lives to squeeze out one more transport. What he didn't realize while he was yelling and hanging up was that he'd made a very specific mistake. He forgot who I used to work for. The $50 bonus is a chilling detail. It underscores how cheaply he valued safety and lives. The OP's refusal is a pure ethical stand, not defiance. His fear of killing someone highlights the real stakes, making the owner's explosion a reveal of true character. Profit at any cost. After the call ended and the reality of being fired finally settled in, I stood there for a moment just staring at my phone. Not pacing, not yelling, just standing still, letting that hollow, buzzing feeling spread through my chest. I'd been fired before, but never like that, never for refusing to do something unsafe, never by someone who clearly didn't care whether I lived through the night. My partner asked what happened. I told them briefly. They just shook their head and muttered something along the lines of, "That guy's going to kill someone one day." At the time, I thought that was just frustration talking. I went home angry, exhausted, and honestly, a little shaken. EMTs get used to stress, but this wasn't the normal kind. This was the kind that sticks with you because you know you were one bad decision away from disaster. I kept replaying the scenario in my head, driving through the night, blinking too long, drifting just enough to cross a line, all for $50. That night, after the adrenaline wore off, something else kicked in, memory. Before this EMT job, I hadn't just worked in EMS, I'd interned at the regional EMS regulatory agency. The people who issued licenses, the people who decided whether ambulance companies were allowed to operate at all. I hadn't thought about that job in months because internships come and go, but the connections didn't disappear just because I moved on. And more importantly, I remembered who my supervisor had been. He was a veteran paramedic, the kind of guy who'd been in the field longer than I'd been alive. Calm, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when it came to safety violations. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he said something was a problem, it stayed a problem until it was fixed. I still had his number. I called him that same night. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I just told him exactly what happened, how long my shift was, what the transport request involved, what the owner expected, and how he reacted when I refused. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said very quietly, "That's not okay." I asked if I'd done something wrong, if refusing the call could come back to bite me. He told me no, not even a little. Then he asked a few very specific questions about scheduling, equipment, staffing, and whether this kind of thing happened often. I answered honestly. When I finished, he said, "I'll take care of it." And that was it. No explanation, no promises, just those 4 words. I didn't push. I didn't ask what he meant. I'd learned during my internship that when he said something like that, it wasn't an empty statement. Still, I assumed it would amount to a phone call or maybe a warning. At most, I figured the company might get slapped with a fine. I went to bed angry, but resigned. I started job hunting the next day. The call to the regulator is the turning point, and it's brilliantly underplayed. The veteran's quiet, "That's not okay," and "I'll take care of it," are far more menacing than any threat. This highlights the power of speaking truth to institutional authority. The calm, factual report is more devastating than any emotional outburst. Fortunately, EMTs are always in demand. Within 2 weeks, I landed a position with a much larger, far more reputable company. They had over 40 ambulances, an actual HR department, reasonable scheduling, and supervisors who cared more about compliance than squeezing every last dollar out of a shift. It was night and day. During training, everything felt different. The expectations were clear. Safety was emphasized constantly. Fatigue wasn't treated like a moral failing. I remember thinking, oh, this is how it's supposed to work. Then one morning during orientation, someone walked into the room that made me do a double take. It was a former coworker from the old company. She looked exhausted, thinner, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. After the session ended, I pulled her aside and asked how things were going. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "Didn't you hear?" she asked. "Hear what?" She told me that the day after I was fired, my former supervisor showed up unannounced for a surprise inspection. No warning, no heads up, just walked in with a clipboard and full authority. Apparently it was ugly. Expired medical equipment, missing required supplies, vehicles not properly stocked, maintenance logs that hadn't been updated, crew quarters that didn't meet basic standards, scheduling violations that proved people were being pushed far past safe limits. It wasn't 1 or 2 issues, it was everything. The company was shut down on the spot. Most of the EMTs quit immediately. They'd already been on the edge, and this was the final push. The remaining office staff and supervisors only stayed because the owner was paying them extra just to keep the lights on while he scrambled to fix the mess. I stood there listening, stunned as she kept talking. From what she heard, it took nearly 2 months to get the company operational again, and that was just the beginning. The reveal through the former coworker is perfect. It allows the consequences to unfold organically. The ugly inspection finding, everything wrong, confirms this wasn't a one-time lapse, but a rotten foundation. The immediate shutdown and staff exodus show the regulator didn't just issue a warning, he applied decisive systemic justice. As my former coworker kept talking, the full scope of the damage started to come into focus, and I realized just how badly my old boss had underestimated the situation. The shutdown wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a slap on the wrist. The agency didn't say, fix a few things and call us next week. They pulled his operating privileges entirely. No transports, no billing, no ambulances rolling, nothing. For a company that already lived call to call, that was catastrophic. Every day he was shut down, he was losing money. Not just profit, but survival money. Ambulance companies don't have massive margins, especially small private ones. Insurance payments are slow. Contracts are fragile. Miss a few weeks of service and hospitals stop calling. Nursing facilities find other providers. Once those relationships are gone, they don't come back easily. And while all that was happening, he was hemorrhaging staff. Most of the EMTs walked immediately. Not dramatically, not loudly. They just stopped answering calls and stopped showing up. They were tired, burned out, and now terrified that they were one bad shift away from being blamed for a systemic failure. No one wanted their license tied to a company that had regulators crawling through it with a fine-toothed comb. The few people who stayed did so purely for survival. According to my coworker, the owner was offering bonuses just to keep office staff from quitting, cash under the table, promises he probably couldn't keep, anything to maintain the appearance of a functioning business while he scrambled to fix violations. And those violations weren't cheap. Expired equipment had to be replaced immediately. Ambulances had to be pulled from service and restocked properly. Crew quarters had to be upgraded to meet minimum standards. Documentation systems had to be overhauled, policies rewritten, schedules rebuilt from the ground up to comply with fatigue and labor rules he'd been ignoring for years. None of that generates revenue. All of it costs money. By the time the company was allowed to operate again, nearly 2 months later, the damage was already done. Lost contracts, lost reputation, lost trust, lost staff. From what I heard later, even when he reopened, calls were slow. Facilities that used to rely on him had moved on to bigger, more stable providers. Someone eventually ran the numbers loosely between fines, emergency repairs, lost income during shutdown, paying staff just to stay, and rebuilding compliance. The total damage was estimated north of $250,000. All of that because he tried to force an exhausted EMT to drive 600 miles for $50. That part still blows my mind. Not because of the amount, but because of the mindset. He saw employees as expendable, safety as optional, regulations as obstacles instead of guardrails. He thought intimidation would work because it always had before. He assumed that line of EMTs didn't have leverage, connections, or voices that mattered. He was wrong. What still sticks with me is how calm the whole thing felt once it started rolling. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I didn't file a formal complaint myself. I just told the truth to the right person, and then I stepped out of the way. The system did the rest. A few months later, I ran into another former coworker who told me the owner never really recovered. The company limped along for a while, but the shine was gone. Regulators kept a closer eye on him. Staff turnover stayed high. Every inspection became a source of anxiety. The confidence he'd once wielded like a weapon was gone. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. The new job treated me like a professional. I learned more, slept more, felt safer. Eventually, I finished nursing school and transitioned out of EMS entirely. I still have immense respect for people who stay in that field because it's brutally hard work for shockingly little pay, and it chews up good people every day. But I also learned something important from that experience. Revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like refusing to participate in something unsafe. Sometimes it looks like making one phone call. Sometimes it looks like letting people face the consequences of the shortcuts they've been taking for years. I still think about that phone call sometimes, the way he yelled, the certainty in his voice when he fired me, the way he thought he held all the power in that moment. He had no idea that the worst decision of his career wasn't firing me, it was assuming I didn't know who to call afterward. And that's why this remains the most satisfying revenge I've ever experienced. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't even fight back. I just stepped aside and watched the weight of his own choices finally catch up with him. The concluding reflection elevates the story from simple revenge to a lesson in institutional justice. The $250,000 plus consequence is the literal price of his ethos. The most satisfying element is the elegance of it. The narrator's power came not from combat, but from knowledge and integrity, allowing a broken system to function as intended for once. The final lines perfectly encapsulate the theme, the weight of his own choices. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.